Thank you for coming today. Our technology seems to be straight now. My name is Maranda Devonport. I am an adjunct instructor here at Weatherford College as well as Richland College in history. I am an archaeologist and historian. I've worked as a cultural resource management archaeologist and historian, and I have a master's degree from the University of Texas at Arlington in history. And this is my project, or part of it is mine, I should say. Little Egypt and bringing public history into the classroom. A collaboration across disciplines and communities. I felt that it was apropos, since this is an interdisciplinary academic conference, that we should talk about something that is actually interdisciplinary, which this project is, and you will see. So, a little bit of background. In the beginning, in the fall of 2013, the history department at Richland College launched an oral history project, which encompassed all modalities of its U.S. history program. This kind of morphed into Richland College's Little Egypt Public History program, which is designed to uncover the history of this lost African American community in Dallas. And to do this, we use an interdisciplinary approach, but in order to do this, we need partnerships that are interdisciplinary. So we need these partnerships from multiple fields. And often, what you find in academia sometimes is people don't really work well outside of their own field or with people outside of their own fields. So being able to do something like this and actually having it work is a plus. So the current project, this involves an interdisciplinary approach by creating a guided learning community in history, archaeology, geospatial technology, three-dimensional modeling, public education, and community partnerships. Often historians, or really anyone, when they start a project that could have these multiple disciplines involved in it, if they're working alone, what you end up getting is kind of part of the whole. And I can guarantee you that I have no idea how to do this three-dimensional modeling stuff. If we did not have someone who could do it, you would not see that part of this project. But since we do, and we're making those partnerships, we can make kind of this whole project happen. So, lost and found. Little Egypt 50 years later. This is a nice picture of some students doing field work. And another picture of professors and students working in the field. Understand that without the participation of students, this project would not be where it is right now. Because we have so many people involved, we can do a lot of work faster. And as long as it's guided, that work is going to be quality, and we're here to try to make sure we guide this work toward quality and as much speed as possible. So let's talk about the community itself. 1879, 1880, a man named A.R. Griggs helps found the Egypt Chapel Baptist Church, or what becomes the Egypt Chapel Baptist Church in the White Rock area. Often at this time, when you look at churches, churches are founded, but they're not necessarily geographically tied to like a specific building. Right? The church is a community. And often churches will move buildings around, and often when they start, most church meetings are actually held in someone's house, right? Like someone who has a larger house for the meeting area. So you've got this African American community of former slaves founding this church. and becoming a community. In 1883, former slaves Jeff and Hannah Hill buy roughly 40 acres with their own money. Chances are they saved up this money because they were farm laborers and they wanted to own their own land and farm their own land, which was a big deal for African Americans and former slaves at the time, since most worked someone else's land. Then by 1900, you see the Hills have made the map. This is Sam's street map showing Dallas, or at least the greater kind of Dallas County area. And you see them on the census schedule, living there. And by about 1920, the Egypt community has kind of coalesced, and it is on the map. The question is, with this community, what comes first? The community name, this Freedmen's community, or the church? Does the community get the name from the church, or does the church get its name from the community? Of course, many African Americans at this time, the idea of Egypt is very popular, so you have a lot of kind of Egypt-type churches, right? And this signifies the people of Israel coming out of slavery from Egypt. And this is a question we haven't answered yet, but we hope to. And this is a death certificate of one of the Hills. And if you notice on this death certificate, the place of burial is Egypt, Texas. So this community is official enough to get on a government document and record. And by 1930, we start to begin to see Little Egypt from the air. So during the 20s and 30s, the government spent a lot of money to study soil erosion. So they took aerial photographs of many rural areas. And at this time, this area north of Dallas, Dallas proper at this time, was mostly rural farming communities. So we have the opportunity to see it as it was then. And if you notice, it's just this 40 acres right here, and it's surrounded by other farmland. And you can already start to see quite a few buildings popped up on the land. So by this time, there are quite a few people living there. And by 1949, you can see there are more buildings there. And you can see that the roads in this community are more like dirt trails. They're not officially paved roads or purpose-built roads. And here's another 1949 picture of the community. You can see there's still some farmland out here that's probably being cultivated. But you can definitely see there are quite a few buildings there for people to be living in. Then by 1951, the church building that we know of shows up in an aerial. This is the Egypt Chapel Baptist Church up top there, and there is a motel down here. Coincidentally, many African Americans open up businesses within their own communities for a few reasons, and they have these communities as a form of often self-segregation. And by doing that, they find that they have safety there, or at least as much safety as they can in the society at the time. So for traveling African Americans, having a motel in an African American community is a good thing, because they're not going to be able to use a motel that white people will be able to use at the time because of segregation. This is a sign for the Egypt Chapel Baptist Church. And it was a really quaint brick building, nicely designed and purpose-built. Probably, I would suppose, before they built this building, they were still holding services in someone's private home. And this picture right here, which you saw earlier, is students on the site of the church itself. And by 1958, you notice something has happened around the community. You see nice suburban tract homes. And this is where neighbors start having problems with this African American community in the 50s. If you study African American or minority communities, what you notice is that cities do not like providing services to these communities, basic services that you and I would, take for granted. So this community didn't have any sewage or electricity, which meant they had to dig holes in the ground to put an outhouse over it. But by the 50s, you have this urban sprawl springing up around them, and they have white neighbors that are middle class that don't really like the smell coming from the community. As you could imagine, if everyone living there is doing their business in an outhouse and then just moving the outhouse every once in a while, it's not really sanitary. So because the surrounding neighbors complain to the city actually does something for them. The city digs what they call honey dipper, essentially wells for porta potties. So they actually have a little cistern that you put your porta potty up top, and the city came around and would suck the sewage out of them. But the city never really put any electricity in this community, nor did they ever decide to put roads in the community. All these roads in the community that you see here are essentially trails that people have put in themselves by traveling on them. And you can see this nice contrast with the actual paved roads around the community. The community itself only actually had one phone line that went to it, and it went to a house of a more prominent family there, and they absolutely had to have a phone line because they were in the construction business. And then by 1961, the community is at its height. You see a lot of structures on the land, and you see a lot of roads bisecting it. And you can tell that it is far different and more impoverished than their neighbors around there. And of course, there are plenty of landlords now because the community has been divvied up. Initially, when they started surveying it, they surveyed these nice, neat tracts to determine actual property ownership. But what it turned out was that over time, the residents made a lot of handshake deals that are not on paper. It's like, you pay me and I'll give you this, acre over here. So you actually have a very convoluted ownership to this land. And by 1961, they get bought out. A development company comes in, sees the potential for the land. With all the suburban sprawl around there, they see the potential. And then they decide to buy these people out. And these people want to be bought out by this point. And they're pretty much happy to be bought out. They're not probably given what we would consider a fair market price for, you know, their bit of the land, but they're given a price that they're happy with. The development company that buys them out, what they do is they ask the community to make a decision. So it's not buying people out individually until, you know, there's one last holdout, and then they're pressured to. The entire community makes the decision together. And for the most part, they're happy with this because, well, if they get bought out, this means they get the chance to go move somewhere that actually has sewage and roads and maybe electricity. Get the electricity so they don't have to smoke their own meat to preserve it anymore. So the deal is fairly generous. They get bought out. The company that buys them out, they actually pay for the moving vans themselves. And on one day in 1962, the moving vans come in and everyone leaves. And the bulldozers come about a week later, and then the community is gone. Just disappears overnight. Old freedmen's community of former slaves and their descendants is gone. So, yes, Tuesday, May 15th, 1962, this happens. And the universe works in mysterious ways. While doing this project and, you know, promoting it, we were contacted by a family who says, who told us that I think it was their grandmother had been alive back then and took her 8mm camera out and shot pictures actually on moving day. So this right here is footage actually shot, if it'll start, on moving day. And it gives you a sense of what the community looked like. And we would not have gotten this if we did not have media partners. Notice many of the buildings are nothing more than shacks. You can see why many of them actually wanted to move. What we're finding out through our research is that many of the residents of Little Egypt were possibly not permanent residents, but they were transient farm laborers that would come back to Little Egypt in the round of farm labor that they did. So they might work in this area for a few months, stay in Little Egypt, and then move on, and then next year come back roughly at the same time. So the assumption there is many of the people, maybe a core group of the people who lived there, rented out various properties to others while they worked in the Dallas area. And of course in the 50s, if there's less farmland to work, there's probably less rental money coming in, which may be a reason that in the 60s, these, at least this film, shows buildings that are more degraded than other pictures we have of the community. So, Providence being with us again, one of the families that lived there is still alive. The McCoys, specifically. The McCoys lived there at the time when moving day happened, and they grew up there. Specifically, the two McCoy brothers. they were old enough, they were in their, they were 13, 14, 15. They were of the age where they remember their house being built, and they're old enough to remember the community. But they're not so old that maybe their memory is going, as sometimes happens with people as they age. So these people are a treasure trove for us, and we have been collecting oral history interviews from them. And of course, because their memories are so good, they can kind of give us an idea of who lived where, because they remember where everyone lived, and give us names of the individuals who lived in this community. So you can see from this, we can start to parse out and put together a history for this community. And of course, it goes just beyond getting the history of it. We can take these aerials, and now we can look individually at the houses there, and the McCoys can tell us exactly who lives where. That way we have a layout to the neighborhood. Like this. And show them on a photograph from the time period before the actual moving day. There's Commodore Hill. So, because the universe works in glorious ways, there is one property from this community that was not developed on. The rest of the community, when it was bulldozed, had been developed over and built upon, except for the McCoys' house, the people who are still alive. So, because of this, we're able to do archaeological field work out there to get the physical remains, the cultural, the material culture of these people. However, archaeological field work needs labor. And this labor cannot happen without student involvement. Without the student involvement, that's the main driver for this field work, and that's why it's as far along as it is right now. Often you find when you have a archaeological gig where you're relying on volunteers, many of these volunteers love to sign up and say they want to do this thing, but they don't ever show up, or if they do, they may show up once or twice for like an hour or two and go home. And often volunteers are not as reliable. However, students with the proper motivation are usually much more reliable than volunteers. And of course, if you're an educator, you probably know the proper motivation is extra credit. And they will come out and they will help you. And when they come out, they are learning good skills. They are learning the discipline of archaeology. So if they say want to go work as an archaeologist, they now have some, they now have the experience doing it, and they're more likely to be hired with a CRM firm. And it's good to get out of the classroom, because we learn a lot in the classroom about history or archaeology, but we hardly ever see it practiced. And there's just something about finding something and holding it in your hand and knowing that it is connected to these people that you've probably been studying for quite some time. So you get an emotional connection there to this community that is lost. So this is the McCoys' house down here. Shoreview is still here today. And this road right here is actually still here today. It's now a back alley. But this is where everything is that you're seeing. So this is the lot that the McCoy house is on. And Shoreview's over there. That other road is over there. There is East Lake Cat Hospital right next to it. The Cat Hospital owns the land. And without their permission to come on their land and do this, we wouldn't have been able to have done it. But they have been really nice. They have been one of our strongest partners in this. Because without their permission, you're trespassing. And for some reason, many people don't like trespassers. So, the McCoy Homestead, the Shoreview Manor Apartments, and the Cat Hospital. And this one little bit here is all that's left to allow us to do this field work and open up units. So we're trying to concentrate our area of field work where the house was, the chicken coop, and the smokehouse. And we can fairly find where these are by overlaying these images, the actual historic images, and georeferencing them with the streets that are there today. And to do this, we bring in some technology. So we use geospatial technology. This is really supervised by the genius of my family, my wife, Maranda Devonport, who has a master's degree in geospatial information sciences. So what we're doing here is we're integrating GPS, drone technology, and the actual GIS to enhance the field work and site recording and reporting. This allows us to GIS, to georeference those old images onto the new map, and then map out where we want to dig and lay out our grids. And then once we do that, we can take the drone and fly it up and accurately record every unit we open, and then georeference that onto a map. This is a low-cost option. Has anyone in here seen or been to an archaeological dig, maybe a big one? Okay. So these archaeological digs, primarily, if it's like a big university, will have surveyors' equipment out. Because this is science, right? You have to accurately record where everything is located, and they do so with surveyors' equipment. So every time you see one of those surveyors out on the road with the little yellow tripod, right? That's called a total station. What that is a hyper-accurate GPS. So it takes a GPS position, and then they measure out with that exact distances to where everything is, and then you can map that. And what you generally do is you use that equipment, you map it with the equipment, and then you hand draw a map. And that's expensive. Total stations like that cost anywhere from like $2,000 to $12,000, $15,000. And I'm not sure if you're aware, but for some reason, community colleges don't like to spend big money on stuff like total stations for their professors. So when we're doing a project like this, and we're doing it low budget, we've got to try to do things to invite technology in that's low cost, but will actually benefit our project. And actually, by doing this GIS technology and mapping with the drones and all of that, this actually looks better graphically than the survey equipment and hand-drawn maps. So this is a picture of the two individuals with the drone. The lady on the right is my wife, and the gentleman on the left, who is very handsome, is me, flying the drone. And this is us flying the drone over the units and mapping them. Because the drone also has highly sensitive GPS. So the drone actually takes its own GPS coordinates. So the drone is actually doing what the total station does in addition to taking a picture that can be geo-referenced. And you can't do that with the total station. That way, when you're all said and done, you can do this. You can actually map, say, the geo-referenced pictures, and then you can put in the units that you have completed and dug over that to show exactly how far along you are in the project. And that way you also don't go back, say, 2 or 3 seasons later and put another unit in on top of an old unit that's already been dug. So here's another photograph showing you our grid that's going on versus and some of the units that we've dug. This is around the smokehouse and chicken coop. And this records sites much more easily, really, and graphically it looks better and is more comprehensive. So, uncovering the facts. Like I said, this is student-driven. For my Texas history course that I teach at Richland, I give the students an option to work this project for their regular grade or for extra credit. And I generally have a very robust turnout. And also, my Weatherford College students occasionally want to come out and do this themselves, so they come out. And we get a lot of work done, and generally it's a positive experience for most people. However, you do get dirty. So if you've ever had that elementary school teacher who told you that you'd never make anything in life because you dug in the dirt and played in the dirt, they obviously didn't know there were archaeologists out there. So in and out of the classroom, what we often do is we replace, or at least I do, normal assignments in my Texas history class with guided work on the Little Egypt project. So I step into the role of principal investigator and guide the work on the project. So I have students who've built genealogies for these families that lived there and uncovered some really interesting facts. One of my students found out that there was an interracial relationship that produced a couple of interracial offspring at one point in one of these families. With a very prominent white family. At one point in the census records, these two individuals are labeled, they have the last name of the white family, and they're labeled as mulatto or white. And 10 years later, they don't have that name anymore and they're black. Which, of course, interracial relationships and offspring back then were often not seen as very socially acceptable. They build genealogies. We have students that work with various aspects of oral histories. We have all these oral histories we're doing with these people that are still alive. We work with analysis and curation of artifacts, the artifacts that we find out there. And we do 3D modeling. And we have students who write reports of work on the project. Often when we teach things like history, we teach a history class, but if a student asks, what jobs out there are there that I can do? Often historians say, well, you can be a teacher like me, right? Or a museum curator, but they have a hard time articulating the job aspect. And this gives students a good idea of kind of what they would be doing if they went into public history, working for a cultural resources management firm or a museum, or as a historian for a private corporation or something like that. Here are students presenting a poster at a conference. We get them involved in the actual education part of it too. And we go back to the McCoys. We are working at the McCoys Homestead, essentially, their home. And we're doing the archeology there. The McCoys are still alive. They are a treasure trove. So we are getting them to recreate their house, right? Or at least we're asking them about their house with the intent of recreating it in a 3D model. So they're telling us about their house. We're doing some sketches. We have a few pictures of their house. And we're getting all sorts of details. And of course, the McCoys, the more we do it, the more we can get out of them. Because this is what we're creating. We're creating this 3D model in Unreal Engine. Anyone in here familiar with Unreal Engine? Unreal Engine is what they use to create video games.
Oh, yeah.
Like Call of Duty or Tropico or Battlefield or whatever. But instead of having students use Unreal Engine to, create Viking babes from the north, we're having them create this house. A real project that could transfer to the real world. Because if you can do this sort of thing in Unreal Engine as a project for us, you could also do it, say, working for an architecture firm, right? Creating a 3D model so people can see what the house or the landscape is going to look like. Instead of just having something drawn and say, here, this is what your landscape is supposed to look like. We can create it for people to see. So we're giving students who want to go down that path and have some skill in it, the ability to create something where they can pad their resume with. And the eventual goal landscape around it, chicken coop, smokehouse and all. Because this and all the stuff we collect, all the history that we do, all the artifacts, if we don't use this for education, say this is the McCoys water tower. Without water, they had to have water trucked into them, like every week. We've got to educate. And the end goal is to have all this go to the African American Museum in Dallas. Anyone been there? It's a lovely place. So they're eventually going to curate and archive all of this. And the idea is to give them stuff to have static and tech displays. So you could go to the museum and physically manipulate and go through the McCoys house and see what this house in this community was like. We're also wanting to do the same thing with the church with Unreal Engine. So the museum is a big educational partner, and like the North Tarrant, Texas Archaeological Society. They're a good partner. They've partnered with field work, and they've also partnered with us by allowing us to present on the subject. And pretty much some of the main drivers for this project are my colleagues Clive Siegel at Richland, Tim Sullivan at Richland, Maranda Devonport doing the geography at Richland College, and myself. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring people together with certain sets of skills to make one project that is whole and complete that we can pass off to this museum and say, this is what you need. This has all the artifacts you need to do your displays. This has all the research to tell the history. This is this technology here where you can show people what this community was like, how these people live. That way we can go from a lost community that there are a few articles in the paper about to a community that we have a greater knowledge about. A community that is no longer lost. That way, the ancestors of these people have some history that they didn't have before to pass on to their children. The community has history that it can talk about now. Because most of these freedmen's towns and freedmen's communities, their history's lost. Because we haven't been focusing on people like that, these marginalized communities. And we're trying to bring that back. And we're trying to do our part by getting the community involved. Because the only way to do stuff like this is to get people to care about it and get people involved. And it's like a snowball effect. The longer we do this, the more we partner with people, the more people actually come to us and ask, hey, can I get involved in the project? I actually do Unreal Engine, right? We had a guy just come do that. He's a master at Unreal Engine. So now he's partnering with my Texas history students who do Unreal Engine and 3D modeling, and they're going to get further on the 3D house. But it's these communities that we're trying to build. And we're trying to tell this history of this community while we build these other communities. Any questions? Yes, sir.
How long would you say this process took in total?
Well, we started in, I think, 2014. I started on in the project 2 years ago. And we're going to do the field work out there until there's no more units to be done. And we're going to continue to do oral histories until we pretty much figure out we have as much as we can get. Understand this is an aging community, and as people age out, right, you have fewer and fewer people you can actually talk to about the community. So we don't know when it's going to end, but we know we're working on it. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much.